In this demo video, I'm going to show how to apply plaster strips to a body part, for example a face, to create a sculpture. The first part is to apply Vaseline to all the skin and hair that may be covered by the plaster strips. As we're doing a face, I want to make special attention that I don't cover the eyes and leave a reasonable amount of space around the eye socket, as well as not covering the nose to allow the model to breathe. However, as long as your model can breathe in and out through their nose, you are welcome to cover the lips, but make sure you apply Vaseline first. You can see how the student is applying Vaseline quite thickly over the eyebrow, but then also across the forehead and other parts of the body that have small, tiny hairs. The student applying the Vaseline is actually applying it extremely thickly to the skin, where there's only very small hairs. So in a moment you'll see my hand step in and lighten it up. It's only in parts that are quite clearly hairy, like eyebrows or the hairline, that you need to apply the Vaseline thickly. The rest can be applied in a thin layer to make sure that it's not too annoying for the student, in this case, who has the plaster on their face. Our next step is to apply the plaster to the face. It's really important that when you dip your plaster strips into the water, you're using warm water, because that allows the drying process to happen correctly and ensure that it dries quickly enough so that you can get it off without it being too annoying for the student. When I'm applying the plaster strips, I want to make sure that after I've dipped them in the water, I run my fingers across them to ensure that there's no little gaps in the fabric, and make sure that the fabric is fully saturated with the plaster powder that's now wet. You wet it because as it dries, it solidifies. This first piece I have applied at an angle, and I'm going to apply the next one to cross it over. I want to use this X pattern as I'm applying these plaster strips because it will make my sculpture stronger, creating an almost weave as you would with fabric. So I'm going to keep applying them, alternating sort of an X pattern. If you're applying plaster to someone's face, it's really important to come up with signs and signals so that the model can tell you if there's a problem. In this case, a simple raised hand to alert us if there's a problem, such as water getting in the eyes or the ears, which is uncomfortable for the model. As you're applying the plaster, it's really important to smooth it with your finger to limit how much texture is showing through the fabric. It will make it easier to work with your sculpture after it dries. The smoothing also helps you define the areas more clearly and get as much detail as possible. For example, here you can see the detail of where her lips are and the folds along that area of the face with a large amount of detail. Once you've applied one full layer of plaster across the sculpture, it's good to apply a second layer to make it stronger before you're able to remove it from the model. So it's really important that you make sure you go to 2 layers. However, I wouldn't advise going beyond that if you have to cut the sculpture off, as any more than 2 layers will be too difficult for scissors to get through without injuring the person inside the sculpture. However, for a face, we can merely lift it off. So if you feel like it might be weak, go ahead and add more than 2 layers if need be. It's fine. It won't cause a problem in this case. As you get near the end of the sculpture building process, you will need to check if it's solid, and to do so, it's good to tap with your finger and feel how thick it is. Um, it doesn't hurt also to give a final edge of plaster to make sure you have smooth lines everywhere where the plaster comes to an end. You don't want to have any raggedy sections. After it's dried for an appropriate amount of time comes the removing of the sculpture. Um, to do this, you should ideally work slowly and carefully to make sure you don't injure your model. In this case of a face, all we're going to do is very slowly lift the sculpture off her face. However, with other body parts, you may have to use a pair of scissors to cut the sculpture off. Now, despite the amount of Vaseline we applied, you can see that our model is squinting her eyes and wincing a little bit because it can be a little uncomfortable to have the sculpture removed. Now, this is what a variety of different sculptures look like once they've been removed. You have a leg and the top portion of a foot. You have a whole fist and wrist. You have the top of a hand and the face that we just made. You can see the face on the inside is quite smooth. In fact, to feel it, it feels very thick with Vaseline. However, you have a good profile and you can change and adapt it with more plaster or other materials after. This top of the hand that we've done was easy to remove, just like the face. Our next step is to build the bottom of the hand, and then we'll marry the two together. In this case of a fist, we had to cut it off the student in question to pull it off like a very stiff glove, so you can see where the plaster is sliced. There's also a hole through the center of the fist, as the student whose sculpture it is plans on having this hand holding onto a rope. With the leg, you can see that we cut from heel to calf in a relatively straight line so that we could peel this cast off her leg. You have quite a lot of definition along the toes, including the toenail. Here is each sculpture individually from a variety of views, so you can take a look at exactly what this looks like once they've been removed. One of the great things about working with plaster is how easy it is to modify it. So you can see an original plaster face. This was done by a year 7 student. Then it's been modified using more plaster and cardboard to extend it out. Then the student has applied the guidelines before beginning to paint it. And here are 3 examples of 3 different painted plaster masks done by year 7 students inspired by Pacific Northwest art.